I'm the creative director at Deep Roots. Today, Brian Kempf and James Urban will be presenting on the Urban Tree Foundation's recently completed specifications and details for planting, soil, irrigation, and tree preservation. Brian is the president of the Urban Tree Foundation, and Jim is the principal of Urban Trees and Soils and the author of Up by Roots. In today's webinar, they'll be discussing important changes over previously available standard construction documents, the role of the designer in the project documentation and construction process, and how landscape architects, and engineers can utilize this new tool. These tools were developed by the presenters along with Dr. Ed Gilman of Florida State University and Tyson Carroll, who is also with the Urban Tree Foundation. The documents are based on current research, best management practices, and peer review in each topic area. They are also completely free, open source, and ready to be added to your library. So we will be recording the webinar, and a link to it will be included in a follow-up email that will go out to attendees tomorrow. Everyone will be muted throughout the presentation other than myself and the presenters, but please submit questions at any time using the chat box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We definitely plan to have some time at the end for Jim and Brian to respond. So with that, we're going to begin. Jim, I'm going to make you the presenter now.
Okay, well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Jim Urban, and my colleague Brian Kempf is also on this webinar. So we're going to, this is sort of a quick checklist of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to spend a little time.
Jim, we can't see your screen yet, actually. Did you hit?
Okay. Are you, is there something that I did? Or?
Well, you should have seen a little box pop up on your screen saying that I made you the presenter, and you would have to click OK to show your screen.
Okay, I did not see that. Let me, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry, I was anticipating.
No problem. Now we see it. That's perfect.
Now can you see it?
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so the basic topics today, we're going to talk about how we got to this set of specifications, very brief discussion of some of the legal and use issues, quite a bit of time talking about the new concepts that are in these specifications and details, although it's going to be kind of a very quick of highlights and not, there's an awful lot more than we're going to be able to present. Discussion about how you make these specifications and details your own, how you enforce the provisions, and then a discussion about the feedback process and the editing process that we want you all to participate in. So the details that we're talking about, and the specifications were written in Microsoft Word, version 8 on a Mac. They are stable on both PC and Mac. The drawings were prepared in AutoCAD DWG format and are provided in that format. And there's also a set of PDF details on the same download, so you can see what the details are supposed to look like. And as Lita mentioned, we're covering planting, soil for planting, irrigation, and tree preservation are the 4 areas that we have included. These details are designed to cover the project range from very urban projects to suburban and park projects. So there's a full range of details. The one area that we do not cover is planting soils above roof structures, which is not covered at all in this specification. And for some reason, this is not clicking forward.
Just make sure the PowerPoint window is selected. There you go.
Okay, so Brian?
And thanks for being here, folks. I'm Brian Kempf. I'm the director of the Urban Tree Foundation, and the foundation works in a number of areas. Part of what we do is design urban and suburban landscapes. We get the funding for those projects. We work with municipalities. We work with at-risk youth to build the infrastructure and the community to do the planting. Next. The foundation also works a great deal in professional education, specifically pruning for structure, plant quality, and grant management. And we put out a number of publications that you can see on the screen to help the industry work for plant quality and long-term maintenance. Next. It's important to note that this project, the specification project, was funded from a grant from CAL FIRE. It is a set of documents that is designed for the entire country. However, it was funded from proposition funds passed through CAL FIRE. Next. Tyson and I, when we wrote this grant, our goal was to pull together the best team possible and reached out to Jim Urban, who's with us today, and Dr. Ed Gilman, University of Florida. And we all work in various parts of the country, and it was quite a big effort to put this together, but an enjoyable experience. Next. One of the important things of these documents and details and specifications is there was a great effort to get this peer reviewed. And what you'll notice from the names is we didn't just send this to landscape architects. We sent this, the documents out to various segments of the green industries. There's nurseries, arborists, consultants, irrigation specialists, and so it was really important to get this peer reviewed by various industry segments. Next. A lot of these concepts really came from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Harris, who was the chair of the horticulture department at UC Davis and author of the book Arboriculture. And Dick got very interested in landscape and plant quality very early on as he was seeing problems in the landscape. Dick was actually responsible for developing the landscape architecture department at UC Davis. He in fact taught a class where landscape architects students and horticulture students worked together to design and install a landscape, and he would do this every year on campus. Next slide. And there's a group of folks out there that are paying attention to these issues and working very hard to provide education and outreach to the green industry at large. Next.
Okay. So a few words about the legal aspects of this specification. The word open source means that these are not copyrighted. So when you download them, they are fully usable by you in a professional manner. There are no restrictions on them, with the exception that you can't yourself copyright them. So they are available to all people. When you do use them, they become your specifications and details, as if you had written them from scratch yourself. And you also become liable for that product that you're producing. So it has both an advantage of being able to access them for free, but you also accept the liability when you use them. So essentially, specifications and details become part of a construction contract. Part of a contract is to protect the owner through actions and inactions of the contractors, provide for public safety, and to solve conflicts with other subcontractors. They also are controlling both the aesthetic quality of the project and also the project performance of the various elements. Each of the provisions in this spec and details will impact the project budget and schedule, some significantly more than others. It's important to know that many of these recommendations are not standard provisions and so are going to be looked at by contractors probably thinking they may take more time to do, which some of them will, or cost more. Finally, in any legal contract, it's important that there be enforcement requirements, which there are for submittals and site observations within this document. So it's important to remember this issue that these are not standard to the industry yet. Our hope is that they will become standard. We hope that by the peer review process that they are reasonable, well thought out. And for example, the plant quality specification is not the ANSI Z60, but goes well beyond the requirements of ANSI Z60. And you need to be prepared to sell these ideas to your clients, to the nurseries, and the contractors. Brian?
So some of the new concepts that we dealt with is really dealing with plant quality. And we have focused a great deal of energy on plant structure, both top and bottom. And the tree is the largest architectural feature in the living architectural feature in the landscape, and it's critical that they live and flourish a long time. Next slide. One of the key concepts that actually did show up recently in the Z60 is the idea of large growing shade trees with central leaders. And in order to create a stable framework of the tree, it's critical to develop that strong central leader. And you'll notice the tree to the left has what we call codominant stems, and which the number 3 on the left side, you'll notice the aspect ratio, or the size of the branch into the relation to the trunk, is equal. And this slide shows how to subordinate or slow down the growth on codominant stems and establish the central leader. Next. Why that's important is a young tree with codominant leaders become mature trees with codominant leaders. And research shows by Dr. Ed Gilman that when you have codominant stems with large aspect ratio, the likelihood or the possibility of failure is greater. And the slide on the top is three trees that have identical form, meaning the outside of the crown is the exact same shape, and yet they have an entirely different structure. The tree to the right of your screen has a much more stable framework than the tree to the left of your screen. It is very hard to fix the problems on the left side, and the tree on the right side is incredibly strong. It is not hard to address these issues when the plants are young. This detail gives, or the details give a specification and a detail for what the tree should come out of the nursery like. It also offers a plant correction option for the contractor to be able to select the leader and make the trees conform to the specification at the job site which is a different approach. Ideally, all trees are grown perfectly at the nursery. That's not the case today, and so we're looking to give options to correct issues at the job site. Next slide. And this is simply what the young tree quality crown observation detail looks like, and we tried very hard to provide all the information to accept and reject a plant from the nursery.
Brian, could you explain aspect ratio on this slide more quickly?
Yes.
Some people might not understand that.
Aspect ratio is a newer term to the field of arboriculture, and it's effectively the size of the branch in relation to the trunk, or what it's attached to. And what Ed Gilman's research shows is that branches that are half the size of the trunk are significantly stronger than trees or branches that are, say, 3/4 the size of the trunk. Looking at the lower section, you'll see that the branches are identical to the size A and B, whereas at the top right, you'll see that B is significantly smaller than A, which is a much stronger framework. Another important thing here is many trees get planted in parking lots. Sign clearances are an issue. You can raise a tree with a good central leader and small branch aspect ratio above signage. Clearance is far less of a problem than when you have big wood low on young trees. Roots are a little trickier, and we've made a big attempt in this document to address root zones. I often say trees grow with defects until they don't, and you can see the middle bottom where the trees have effectively failed. Trees grow by cell division. If a stem girdling root bumps into the trunk, it leads for a weak spot. You may see low vitality in the landscape, and you could potentially see failure. Next.
All of the trees in that center photograph that failed all had stem girdling roots on them, and we lost almost over half of all the trees in that park came down, and they all had stem girdling roots.
And the sad thing is, when you're buying a tree, you're buying time. The larger it is, the more expensive it costs. More expensive it is, and there's an incredible amount of time lost in that landscape. And this particular detail shows shaving. And this is another one of Ed Gilman's studies where effectively circling roots on the outside of the root ball are removed at planting. Then the roots grow radially out into the native soils after the tree responds. It eliminates potential defects on the outside of the root ball. Next. The real issue with that is it does not address root issues on the inside of the root ball, and as trees are moved from container size to container size or liner to the field, if circling root issues are not addressed during that process, you can end up with a very significant problem that you don't see. So it's critical for landscape architects when doing inspections to look on the inside of the root ball at what we call the root crown and identify any circling or major circling roots up against the trunk. At that time, a determination can be made whether the tree is totally rejected or if any mitigation can be done to make the plant acceptable for the job site. Next. This is simply a slide showing that process, and you'll notice that the tree on the right has a quite nice root flare where all the roots are radiating out away from the trunk to the outside of the root ball. If you look at the tree to the left, you'll see a 3-gallon area where the roots hit the sidewall of the container. They were not root pruned, and they continue to circle around. At some point, the roots can potentially butt up against the trunk and allow for a weak spot. Gilman found that there was reduced stability in the landscape when this happens. Next. And this is simply showing that often roots will hold their form. And if you look at the tree to the right, you can see that the roots have radiated out very nice from the trunk, as opposed to the one on the right, which the roots are actually still configured in the container form and only grow out to the one side of the tree. Which can potentially lead to stability problems down the road. And again, the trees will live with a defect until they don't, until there's potential failure. So it's not desirable to see the tree on the right in the landscape. Next. And one of the issues is this can potentially create a pretty big safety problem. And this particular tree is located in an amusement park where tens of thousands of families walk under this tree. And if you look at the large photo to the left, you'll see there is roots coming which appear to be coming from the trunk, when in fact those roots initiate from the tree on the other side, circle around, and actually are girdling the trunk right below soil level. That tree in fact snapped and ended up in the parking lot. Fortunately, in this case, no one was hit, but it has pretty significant consequences when a tree like this goes down. And this particular situation could have been avoided with proper cultural practices at the nursery and at planting. Not only is it a safety issue, but it's a loss of landscape. That tree would be quite expensive to buy at that size, and they're going to start over. Next. So want to bring it back to this is we're trying to offer the tools not just in a set of specifications that point these out, but also in the detail to help both the landscape architect and the landscape contractor identify these problems when the tree comes into the job site or it is inspected at the nursery. An inspection really has to be at the root crown area. Next. Another key concept is irrigation. Irrigation is critical importance, and we do see problems in the field down the road. One of the issues that we've noticed working is that often when there's a design problem, the maintenance people get blamed for this, and we pay very close attention to the quality of the irrigation systems that go in. You'll notice this particular valve manifold is set up for maintenance, and what we do is we put an isolation valve behind the electric valve and a union in front of the electric valve. And if you're operating in a scenario where you have, say, a 6-inch main line, you can isolate that valve, you can change the diaphragm, you can pull the valve completely out of the box without having to cut anything or drain the main line. You can work on the system hot. It saves an incredible amount of time for the maintenance folks to be able to work on these, because they do take maintenance, and it's probably about $5 more per valve, so it's not significant in cost, and it's a much better system. Next. It's one of the things that we find is very important in irrigation is we do not plumb the project to meet the demands of the site at the second that the plants go in. We in fact oversize many of the lines, so the irrigation can change as the root zone changes on the plant. Next. As you can see in this tree here, it went from a, say, bubbler system to where it was able to switch out to overhead to water the entire root zone. At least root zones change over a period of time. Irrigation needs to change over a period of time. Next. This is something that we see show up on plans and see in the landscape. And I've had a number of situations where a landscape was installed at a new park. The contractor is irrigating the plants, meaning they're running the water, and however the water is going down the tube and following the irrigation trench, and the trees are under a great amount of stress. I find these to be totally ineffective unless they fill up with water and flood over the root zone. If you're in a particularly good soil, which is not always the case in an urban environment, but often the irrigation needs of the tree, particularly in the first year, are not met because much of the water actually bypasses the root zone. So I'd be cautious in using these, particularly long ones that have the bottom below where the root ball is. In a better situation, the water perks through the root zone, not bypasses it.
Yeah, and Brian, I've had these show up on many of my projects, and I actually now reject them when the irrigation design comes in. At a project in Toronto, we almost lost 150 trees because they weren't getting watered because of this system. One of the things that in this new set of specifications is we're going to be doing a lot more soil improvement, and that's going to loosen the soil over a large area around the tree, which is very good, but it also means that the water coming out of these root watering pipes is going to go down and sit on the top of the area of soil that we've improved, which means that almost none of that water is actually getting to the root ball and the root zone of the tree.
Water is a coveted resource in many parts of the country right now. We absolutely cannot afford to waste a drop of it.
Right. So a critical aspect of this whole effort is the interrelationship of water, plants, and soils. And we know that if we prepare the soil well, we'll harvest and hold a lot more water than with typical urban soils. And we believe that by implementing both the soils and the tree root zone parts of this specification, we can greatly reduce the amount of water that's needed to establish the plant, and in most areas of the country grow trees and landscapes, with the exception of lawns, without any irrigation after establishment. This is going to become a very important factor to the profession as more and more of the country starts looking like California. So in order to get the soil part of this correct, you're going to find in the planting specification that there is no mention of soil at all. It just refers you to a specification section called soils, planting soils, and the drawings will refer you to a series of details that detail the soil. Because we're no longer just amending the soil at the planting hole, but we're going to be putting down either large areas of soil or amending the entire future rooting zone of the tree or the plant. So we're doing essentially a bed approach to soil rather than a planting hole amendment idea. Another new concept that you're going to find in this specification is quite a different warranty than you may be familiar with. I have a real problem with the plant warranties in that they basically relieve the contractor from any problems after the end of the warranty period. And I can make a tree stay alive through the warranty period fairly quickly and still end up with a tree that is not the quality that I would like to see in my projects. So we've introduced the idea of something called defective plants. So the plant only needs to be defective at the end of the warranty, not dead. So then we define fairly closely what those defects are that is important to be considered. You're also going to find that each different way in which a plant can be delivered to the site, whether it's a balled and burlap or container or boxed or grow bags or bare root, actually requires a different kind of planting detail and different kind of planting specification. So you're going to find a section on each of these different kinds of root packages with the recommendations for both quality and planting that need to go along with the change across these different planting types. On the tree preservation specification, I'm going to point out this soil moisture box that we've added, and actually this soil moisture box is in both the plant, the soil, and the tree preservation box, because most often the specs will simply talk about keeping the plant hydrated or some very vague language. This soil moisture box gives you very specific numbers that you can put on the requirement based on soil type, because the volumetric moisture numbers change with soil type, and gives you a point to measure. Another big change is that the tree preservation specs recognize that we have to build and do things within the tree protection zone. We have to pave in there. The slide here shows a building that we built within the tree protection zone. And these things are all possible as long as you have the appropriate limitations. One of my favorite tools in tree preservation is to put the construction trailers and a fair amount of the storage within the tree protection zone, because it effectively protects the zone, it keeps equipment out of there, and having the contractor's trailer located in the shade of a tree you're trying to protect will make sure that other pieces of equipment and other bad things don't happen in that critical area. So let's talk for a moment about how you make these specifications and details your own. I've already explained the computer programs that we use, but it's important to note that both the details and the specifications are not finished products when you receive them. You actually must edit them to make them work for the drawings. So think of these as templates, not as a finished set of specs and drawings. To help you with this editing process, you're going to find throughout the specs a number of what we call notes to specifier or instructions to specifier, which are always in red, and they will give you a message of something you're supposed to do in the following paragraph, something you should check that needs to be done. For example, because these were produced for California Department of Forestry, there are about 4 places in the specs where there are California ordinances and laws that are cited. If you're not doing that project in California, there will be a little note that will tell you to remove that particular paragraph from the document. At the beginning of each specification section is an entire preamble page, which I like to think of as Specifications 101, and it gives you some basic big picture things that you need to consider when you're editing specifications or writing specifications. So you need to make sure that the specifications meet your regional standards and practices. The requirements in a project in Florida for a whole bunches of reasons are different than they might be in Minnesota. And so you've got to make those kinds of changes. Each project is likely to have some unique conditions or requirements. Each market is going to have a different level of acceptance. For example, the kinds of trees we're looking for, you can actually buy in Florida and a few other markets, particularly Chicago, for example. In other markets, it may be really difficult to get the trees we're looking at. And each of these requirements has cost impacts. Finally, the specifications do not include any provisions for moving very large trees. And you'll have to add and find that information if you have a really large tree that you're going to transplant. You need to understand that each spec section has to be compatible with both the general conditions of the contract that you're working within and special conditions and other specification sections. So there is some coordination that you have to do. When you begin to modify the details and the specifications, it is important to keep the nomenclature and instructions consistent. So if you change the name of something on a detail, you need to make sure that that name is also changed in the specification. And you also should avoid duplicate or conflicting information where you might have a requirement on the detail to see the soil preparation plan, but if you don't have a soil preparation plan, then the detail doesn't tell the contractor what to do. One of the things, as you begin to put these details on your drawings, I see that many of us often put something called general notes on our planting drawings and other places. These specifications are designed to replace all of your general notes. So you basically should, if you have a specification book, you should take those kinds of off of your drawings because they're very likely to be conflicting with things that are in the specification. So within the industry, we see a lot of times the specifications go into a large, thick project manual book which has all the specifications in it. The problem is that these get buried in the contractor's office and often are not looked at. And sometimes the alternative is to actually put those on the drawing. And this is something Brian's been doing in his work. You want to spend a little time on that?
Yeah, you know, it was frustrating, or we became very frustrated that we felt, or we could tell, that the landscape contractors absolutely were not looking through the specifications, and they're part of such a large document that we in fact incorporated them right into the construction drawings and have sent several projects through with the detail or specifications with the details right in the CDs. They don't take up a considerable amount of space. You're looking at about 4 pages total, and then there is no discussion that we didn't see it. It was buried behind electrical in the back 40 of the specs manual. I realize that this is different than everybody else does. However, we happen to believe that our discipline is important, that landscape is of huge importance, and felt that because we're sometimes lost in the shuffle of a big project, that it was critical to put those right on the plans. And it's been accepted well, and we've been doing this pretty much on every project since we finished this specification detail project.
One of the things that this points out, though, is that these are fairly long specifications. And on smaller projects, for various reasons, you may feel you don't need all the provisions that are in this specification. I would caution you, every time you remove something, it's there for a reason. And please don't edit these specifications to be much shorter simply so they fit on the drawings. You should have a reason for every clause that you decide to remove from the specifications. Brian, you want to talk about the quality control?
Well, you know, again, plant inspections are of utmost importance, and I would say often not done. And you know, what we started noticing is that the plant specifications were buried in a big document that nobody read, and that's one of the reasons that we put these in the details, so when the contractor sees the details, they'll notice, wait, there's plant quality stuff here, which hopefully prompts them to reach out to the nursery and provide the nursery the spec. If the nursery does not have the specs and the details or understanding what they're to deliver to the project, it creates a lot of problems. And plant rejections don't help anybody. They are necessary, but it really is, it's hard on the contractor, it's hard on the nursery, and our belief is that putting these things in the details, calling them out on the specifications on the plan, prompting the contractor to reach out to the nursery earlier in the process, and also identifying what specifically these things are. Not everybody knows what a codominant branch is. The detail shows you what that is. So there's I guess no excuse, because we put it everywhere on what is expected on a given project.
So if you're going to be enforcing these specifications, it's really critical that the owner provide the support to you, both saying that they will back you. They need to understand that this is a new approach to the whole process. We strongly recommend pre-purchasing of plants, but that is obviously difficult. But you're basically going to be in an educational mode with the clients, the contractors, and the nursery for some amount of time. One of the big problems that I see is that the landscape architect is losing their construction administration fees in the industry. We don't get out of the office onto the job sites, and we've got to figure out as a profession how to turn that around, because it's really hurting us even with the specifications we have. There is this whole section on submittals and mock-ups, which is your first line of defense to enforce any of these specifications. Pre-construction meetings are critical and are provided for. Nursery inspections are absolutely a must in order to get good plant quality, and I've been seeing nursery inspections disappear on my own projects. It's really hard to get out there. Sometimes it's hard to even get the landscape architect to have the fee to visit the site for anything other than the final punch list. There are soil quality provisions setting standards for ways of checking compaction, the debris that's allowed, and you might be surprised that a certain amount of debris is actually allowed, and the smaller pieces of debris that you see in this slide would all be allowed under these specifications. Only the paver would have to be removed. So you might want to check and make sure you can stand behind allowing a beer can or two to show up in the soil. So that's the basic process. We've really just glanced through it. A critical part of the process right now is that you, by accepting or using these specifications, become part of the peer review and editing team. We need your feedback and comments, details we may have missed, things that might not be working right. And we are asking you to send emails to Tyson Carroll. I'm going to have his email up in the next slide for you to look at. But these pictures are all pictures of friends of mine, and if any of you are on the phone, I'm really hoping that you will help us in this process of making these specifications better, so that in a year or two we can issue a version 2, which will take all of those kinds of considerations that you're going to send us. We've already gotten some amount of comments. So here are the places you can download the documents. The Urban Tree Foundation website, the International Society of Arboriculture, and the University of Florida are all putting these documents up so that you can download them directly from there. I'm going to leave this slide up during the Q&A period. And again, feedback to Tyson Carroll, Tyson@urbantree.org. And with that, I think we're going to turn over to question and answer. We've got a good amount of time and are looking forward to some discussion.
Great. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Brian. Yeah, we do have about 15 minutes for questions, so if you have any, please start sending them in if you haven't already, and we'll just jump right in. So I'm not sure which one of you would like to take the first one, but can you speak to how some of the tree and root modifications you've discussed here have been accepted by contractors?
Well, Jim, you want to start?
Yeah, I think this is a new thing, and the good contractors that I work with understand what we're doing. The problem until we got these specifications was paying for it. Our hope is that these will be built in. I have a better chance of getting these actually implemented on trees than I do shrubs, mainly because there are usually less trees and it's fairly obvious sometimes. So we can get them to rip off the soil off the top of the root ball. Shrubs, quite a different operation. Getting contractors to think that I have to modify 500 container plants on a project, but that's coming. Ryan?
I will say that we certainly use them on the projects that we install. We follow it. I would say that there is a little resistance to it because it is new, and the hope is that over time these will become more accepted. As far as structure and root quality, the hope is in the long haul we'll have really top quality nursery trees available across the board, so less modification would be required down the road. Right now I would say across the country the quality of nursery tree produced varies tremendously, and I think as things change we'll be in a much better situation. They will only change if the landscape architects use the plant quality specifications, nurseries and contractors begin to see them. That's what will drive change, and that's why Tyson and I felt it was so important to do this project because landscape architects, at least from where we see, drive or have the opportunity to drive industry change through the design and specification process. So we're really looking to this side of the industry to help further the green industry as a whole.
The latest version of ANSI Z60, which comes from the American Nursery and Landscape Association, actually has finally incorporated the provision about roots being too deep, and they also are beginning to look at co-dominant leaders. There's still some provisions that we would like them to change in the next go-round, but you can always specify a plant to be more have a higher quality than ANSI Z60. I also saw yesterday for the first time a nursery advertisement where they're proclaiming and selling their plant quality for the structural pruning they've done in the nursery. Angelica Nursery in Maryland is the first place I've seen that actually is advertising that they're trying to meet these specifications. So things are changing. Lita?
Great. So the next question has to do with larger projects. Can you speak to the cost of remediating problems versus costs of rejected plans, plan modifications, and other costs associated with correct inspections?
Well, let me start with that. The biggest problem, I think, with rejecting plants is its impact on the budget, or not on the budget, but on the schedule. And if you are 2 weeks out from opening and suddenly there's a bunch of plants that show up on the job, at that point, there's really very little you're going to be able to enforce. I find that if we work with the contractor and with the nurseries early in the process, and this is where the submittal process and the nursery inspections are critical, the nurseries are pretty good about understanding that there are problems. It's pretty well known within the nursery industry that this is a problem that needs to be solved. Where the nurseries are at this point is they're competing, the good nurseries are competing with all the nurseries that aren't addressing this issue. And it's really tough for them to produce a really good quality plant and charge the same amount that the other people are charging. So again, it's all about the submittal process and the enforcement of the nursery inspection. And that's a place I think that we have a good basis as a profession to sell those services. We should get paid for them. They will increase our fees, but it takes education on your part with your client during the process.
Brian, is there anything you want to add to that before we go to the next question?
No, I think Jim covered it quite nicely.
Great. So obviously you've had a lot of input from arborists and others in the plant field. Does your spec require the presence of a consulting arborist on the project site so that issues like contractors ignoring specifications is mitigated or managed?
It does on the tree protection, but not the other sections.
Yeah, our assumption is that these are not difficult things for a landscape architect to know, and the way that it is the way it's written in the specifications. You will see the word city, so it's sort of the city shall approve, and city was put in there as a catchword that should be changed. So it might be changed to the owner's representative or the landscape architect or whatever word you think is appropriate. But the point is that we think that a landscape architect can and should have enough training and skill to find these things, and that it doesn't take a specially trained person to see them. It only takes a well-motivated person to see them. These are simple ideas.
We have two questions about irrigation. They're different, but I'm going to toss them out at the same time, and you guys can tackle them in whatever order suits you. One is about the watering system that you showed and whether that encourages roots to grow down. And the second question is about how you mentioned that irrigation is important during establishment, but not necessarily as important long term. I wanted to know a little bit more about the reasoning to spec, a sacrificial irrigation system.
Well, the long-term need for irrigation really depends on where you're where you're at. I happen to live in Visalia, California, which is in the Central Valley, and the environment has changed, meaning the groundwater in 1900 was at 10 feet, and now the groundwater is at 140 feet, meaning even native plants won't reach it. Irrigation is in my region critical for the longevity of the landscape forever. We decrease frequency, increase volume as the landscape matures. We change the pattern over a period of time, but at least in parts of the country, irrigation is there forever. It doesn't mean that it should stay the same as was installed. It should be designed to be altered as plant root zones change. The other one, I think, is referring to the deep root bubbler, perhaps.
I think so.
And, again, the real issue there is the water has to go through the root zone. Plants can't critically think. And if the water bypasses the root zone and goes down the irrigation trench and is wet, 6 inches away from the root ball or the roots, the plant doesn't know that the water's there. Roots don't grow to water. They grow in soils conducive to root growth, which means they have the right amount of moisture and oxygen. And so it's a bit of a fallacy to think, or it's not quite right to think that we'll drop water down a tube and roots will only grow in that form. Roots grow a function of plant genetics, cultural practices, compaction. There's a lot to do with how roots grow. But simply putting a drain tube and watering down that tube really doesn't influence root structure, and in fact, from my experience, has caused more problems than good.
It's important to separate the irrigation needs for establishment versus long-term. And I think the root watering tube, especially the deep ones, are thinking about the long-term, but I'm still in the kinds of very loose soils, particularly if you're using an engineered high sand soil, the water is just simply not going to get to the part of the tree when it's needed at the time of planting. So as a plant establishment idea, it's really a terrible idea. And as I've said, we've come very close to losing large numbers of trees on projects because of these systems. And the contractor saying, I'm watering it like crazy, and the tree is dying because it's not getting enough water. Addressing the issue of a sacrificial irrigation system, I am very convinced that if you get the soil right, and that's been the missing point over a large area, if you're in the line east of the 30-inch per year rainfall, which is a line that runs down the set of states that just west of the Mississippi, if you're in that eastern part of the country, you should not need irrigation for trees after they become established. I've also been in places like Phoenix, Arizona, where landscape architects have said, oh, everything here has to be irrigated in order to live. And I pointed out trees that clearly were not irrigated and I said, how is this tree surviving? And the answer is, yes, it's not irrigated, but it has good soil. So if you get good soil, your irrigation requirements are going to go way down, and if you combine that with then native or very drought-tolerant plants, you're going to be just fine. You really will. Lita?
And can I say, I kind of agree with Jim more. Modern developments that compact not just where the footing is, but compact the entire home site to 95%. We see the water run straight out to the sidewalk and into the gutter pan. And very little deep watering happens, and it's just a shallow application of water, which people are now watering 5 days a week when you could get away with once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks if the soil could actually take the water. So Jim's comment on soil prep is huge, and it unfortunately is rarely done.
These ideas are embedded in the ASLA Sustainable Sites documents. You'll find that temporary irrigation systems are encouraged. Again, I believe we can do temporary irrigation systems in areas you would never believe. So give it a try.
We've been on for about an hour, but we still have quite a few attendees on the call and a lot of questions. Brian and Jim, do you have time for a few more?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. All right, we'll go through a couple more. How do you deal with establishment and warranty when planting is incidental to a large capital project, and that project must be closed out immediately after planting because the schedule required that planting occur at the end?
It's unclear from the question whether you're saying that after the closeout there's no ability for warranty, but I firmly believe that the warranty is often used as a crutch or as a weapon for bad work. So I don't put a lot of stock in the warranty. What I want to do is to get the plants, a good plant planted correctly in the right soil. Your loss ratio is going to go way down. That's where the effort should go, so that once the project is closed out, the plants should be well with normal maintenance. And in some areas, that is going to require water. You're going to, regardless of where you are in the U.S., you're going to have to water those plants for the first year after they're put in. I don't know any way around that.
The other thing that we've instituted something a bit different here, where typically there's a 90-day maintenance period, and then the landscape contractor is off the job. Generally, landscape needs maintenance, and at least all the public projects that we work on, we make the part of the project is 1 year maintenance period of the person who installed it. And so that goes right into the thing, and it's generally easier to deal with some of those problems because they don't necessarily show up right out of the gates. If the same person that built it's still required to maintain it for that year, and that does go into the bid, it's a bit easier to correct things that at least are faulty in that first year.
And Brian, do the specifications address maintenance during that 1 year guarantee period?
Yeah. Well, yes.
Actually, they do. There are two options for the warranty period. One is with maintenance and defines all of the things that the contractor is supposed to do during that maintenance period. The second is if there isn't maintenance and the owner is going to provide the maintenance. There are provisions to protect the contractor from bad maintenance by the owner and still allow the warranty provisions to prevail. So you should look at both of those options when you're using this specification, and you need to know what the owner, which direction the owner wants to go.
Mm-hmm. I know that you've only been able to touch on a few elements of difference in these details and specifications, so some of the questions are around things that you probably didn't get to, and one of those is whether mulch is addressed anywhere, organic versus non-organic, around the stem, specialized situations like rain gardens, anything like that?
We wrestled with mulch a great deal. On our projects, we use a tremendous amount of it. In general, we try to keep the mulch or just maybe a very thin layer or none right on top of the root ball. We try to avoid that in a very dry climate. We have not seen issues with mulch on root balls. However, if you're in Florida and the mulch maintains wet on top of the root ball, you can develop some problems. But we use an incredible amount of mulch, and we use orchard grindings in my particular area, or wood material. For our projects, we're not using rock mulch or other things, but do find them to be effective in various scenarios.
The mulch that is in the specification is a very coarse mulch, which is very common in California. I think in other parts of the country you probably have to modify that specification to meet local products. But I recommend a very coarse mulch, as coarse as you can stand. And then it should also be very, very thin. 2 inches should be the maximum you ever put it down. I would ultimately like, and we need some research on this, to maybe get rid of all the mulch in our plantings. I've had more problems on my projects that have been caused by mulch being too wet, especially on the East Coast, areas where you get rain. Having that, if you have a very fine textured bark, shredded bark mulch, and it gets wet and starts holding water up there, it can cause all kinds of problems. So I would like to see us eventually, at least in the wetter parts of the U.S., get rid of mulch completely.
And in the drier parts, we almost can't live without it, because the mulch, we don't have any rain in the growing season in general, and the mulch actually stays dry and prevents a lot of weeds and ultimately breaks down. So I think that particular specification really has to be addressed at where the project is, because it's not the same across the board on the issues, the positives and the negatives of mulch.
Thanks. Let's have one last question here. You indicated that a specification for improved planting soil is part of what you've shared here, and that this improved soil goes beyond just the tree opening. Do you specify the area required for amended soil, and have you considered the cost implications for that?
Yes, we have. One of the things that's absolutely required in your drawings is a soil plan, a separate plan that is diagrammatic, that shows where the soil is being amended and to what depth, and it may be literally just tilling. It might be tilling plus adding organic. It might be wholesale replacement of the soil. So to address the cost issue, the first thing that we have to do as landscape architects is we have to do a decent soil analysis of the soils that are at the site. I too often see the really good soils taken away, and actually poorer quality soils brought in, particularly engineered soils. I really hate engineered soils in almost all applications. There are a few where it might make sense, but most often the soil that is at your site can be reinvigorated by simply tilling it and adding organic matter. But you need to do that over a large, broad area, not at the planting hole. So our planting detail basically says dig the smallest hole you can dig practically to get this tree in the ground. The idea that making the hole 2 times the size or 3 times the size of the root ball is going to solve the problem is utter nonsense. And so where you're going to save the cost is understanding what kind of soil you have. And then if you have to bring in soil, bringing in a cheaper soil that is not so highly processed. We don't want to have soil that's heavily screened. We want to allow soil that's going to have lots of inert objects in it. I don't mind rocks and sticks. I really didn't even mind that brick that I showed you, a paver. That can stay in the soil. It's not going to hurt the tree at all. It might make it a little hard to dig the hole, but it's not going to hurt the plant.
And we do have, for where compaction is an issue, some radial trenching details that will at least break the compaction and leave a root path that is far better than doing nothing. So, you know, there is what I would say a low-cost solution that we use ourselves quite frequently, where we're in medians and other areas where we'll take the trencher and effectively cut what looks like an asterisk as long a distance as we can. Then we knock that down with a rotor tiller, and it effectively is breaking up the 95% compaction and allowing for root path. Because not every project can we pull all the soil out and replace it. Not every project warrants it. But what we try to do is you will see that there's a detail that fits a large amount of different scenarios as far as soil modification.
Yeah, we've given you, in there, our whole range of options depending on what your existing soil is like and what your budget may be. You will not find in there an option to do something very cheap that we know will not work.
I would agree.
And so yeah, much of the standard details that we see in specifications we see in our profession do not work, or do not work in these difficult conditions. So we need you to spend a little more time investigating the soil that you have and learning when you can use it. And I think we actually had a whole webinar on that, didn't we, Lita? I think.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so dig that webinar out and look at that one.
Well, I think we should probably wrap up. We've been very generous with your time, so thank you guys. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. Just to reiterate, a follow-up email will go out tomorrow that will contain a link to download the details and specifications that were discussed today, a link to Brian and Jim's slide deck, and also a recording of this presentation. Please share it around. We want as many people to know about this resource as possible. So you can find more information about Deep Root on our website or on our blog. The Urban Tree Foundation has a blog. Jim has or a website. Jim also has a website. And Brian, did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I just, the feedback on the specifications and details are critical, and it is appreciated for folks to reach out. I know we said that. I just wanted to end with that, is we're building this stuff for you in the state of the green industry, and it's very helpful if we get feedback, suggestions, comments, criticisms.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll also, on that note, I'll also add your email address, Brian, and yours, Jim, as well, to the follow-up email, so we can encourage people to reach out to you directly with their experiences. So thank you both so much for your time today, and thank you to everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Thanks.